Welcome back to another episode of Thursday's Theology. My name is Jeff and I am your host, and we are continuing our series looking at the theology of Assassin's Creed. And today we are actually going to look at the three tenets of the brotherhood. And the three tenets of the Assassin's Brotherhood is stay your blade from the flesh of an innocent, number one. Number two, hide in plain sight. And number three, never compromise the brotherhood. Now, for each one of these things, I think that they tie into theology really, really well, actually. And without any further ado, let's jump into it. So violence is, the first tenet of stay your blade from the flesh of an innocent. I think what is highlighted here is that violence is never, ever condoned by followers of Christ. Now, where I get that from is the Sermon on the Mount. Now, the Sermon on the Mount is when Jesus has a large crowd around him, and he's teaching different things, basically saying, you know, you've heard it this way, or you've heard it taught this way, but I tell you this is actually what it means. And that is where we get the idea of Christians turning the other cheek, because Jesus basically says, you've heard it said that if somebody slaps you on the cheek, you hit them back. And he basically says, no, like I say, if somebody slaps you on the cheek, you turn the other one. Now, the reason why Jesus does that, without getting into a whole long theological explanation of it, but why Jesus says that is because by turning the other cheek, you are forcing the aggressor, you're forcing the person who's using violence to use even more violence. So the idea is that you're forcing them to expose just how violent they are by offering a second time to strike you. Now, that goes into a whole lot of like peacemaking and just war theory and theology and stuff like that, which we're not going to get into in this episode at least. But all that to say, when Jesus says turn the other cheek, it's basically getting rid of any excuse we have to use violence. Now, tenet number two, be in this world but not of it. And this really highlights the second idea of the Assassin's Brotherhood of hiding in plain sight, because when we are called to be in the world but not of it, we're called to be part of this world but not be defined by the world. And where I get that from is the book of 1 John. Now, John is one of Jesus's disciples, and he is writing these books, and he wrote the Gospel of John and also 1st, 2nd, and 3rd John, which are letters to people. So in 1 John, his first letter, chapter 2, verse 15, it says, "Do not love the world or anything in the world. If anyone loves the world, the love of God is not in them." And basically what he's trying to say in that passage is that you can either love God or you can love the world, but you can't do both. You're going to have to choose which one your allegiance is to. So when the Assassin's Tenet says hide in plain sight, I think what it really says about Christian theology is this idea of being in the world but not of it. You're hiding in plain sight. You are a human among humanity, but you are defined by Christ and not by the world. So I think that that's a really cool tie-in there. Now, the third tenet is never compromise the brotherhood. Now, this one was a little bit harder to get a theological grounding for, just because the reality is that the church is filled with broken people. It always has been and it always will be. In fact, I believe it was Mother Teresa who was quoted as saying that the church should be a hospital for the broken and not a museum for the perfect. And basically what is at the core of that statement is that the church is just filled with broken, hurting, to be quite honest, awful people. And that's exactly what Christ intended. Church is never supposed to be something where you perfect yourself in terms of like, oh, I'm going to be the perfect person. I'm going to, pray every day at this time and read my Bible X amount at this time and go to church every week and blah, blah, blah. That, it was never intended to be that. Church was supposed to be a place where you sought refuge and healing. I mean, think about it like this. The main places we go to worship are called sanctuaries. And when you claim sanctuary for something, it means you are looking for safety in that. You are claiming to go and say, I want sanctuary here. I want to be shielded from the evil of the world. I want to be shielded from the harm that will come to me if I stay out in the world. So the idea of sanctuary is exactly what church is intended to be. It's supposed to be a place, a safe haven for people to find healing and restoration and not have to feel like they have to put on this perfect face and suppress their problems. So this idea in the Assassin's Tenet of never compromising the brotherhood is impossible to uphold in the church, because you're always going to be compromising the brotherhood of believers and sisterhood of believers, because the brotherhood of Christ and the sisterhood of Christ is compromised by the fact that there's sin in the world. If there wasn't sin in the world, we could be a perfect brotherhood and sisterhood in Christ, and we would have no problems. But the fact that we live in a fallen, broken world means that we are always bringing our sin with us into church. So we are already compromising the brotherhood and sisterhood in that regard. But the good news is that God's grace abounds. And it's the reason why we're able to gather week in, week out with people who are just broken and sinful and terrible people, because God's grace covers a multitude of sins. So I want to end by saying it is impossible not to compromise the brotherhood of Christ and sisterhood of Christ because of sin in the world. But that doesn't mean that we should stop gathering. It doesn't mean we should stop meeting with one another and supporting one another and praying for one another and all the stuff that comes along with being part of this fellowship of believers in Christ. So yeah, that is all I have for you today. Those are the 3 tenets of the brotherhood. Stay your blade from the flesh of an innocent. Violence is never condoned. Hide in plain sight. Be in this world but not of it. And never compromise the brotherhood is kind of impossible to uphold. But yeah, those are the tenets of the brotherhood and how they relate to Christian theology. Thanks again for joining me. My name is Jeff. I'm your host. And remember, theology doesn't always have to be difficult. It is simply the study of who God is. Take care. We'll see you next week.